Hello, everyone. Yeah, my name is Rob. Today I'm going to be talking to you about the brain. Now, the brain, I was never a fan of science when I was at school, but the brain's something I've become very passionate about in the last 2 years. Now, the reason I'd like to educate you a bit on the brain today is that Joe Dispenza, one of my favorite authors, talks about when you have an understanding on a certain subject, that creates awareness around it. Once you're aware of how something works logistically, you can actually be a lot more intentional around going and making a change. So I guess my hope is today, through educating you how the brain processes information, you can actually start to make changes in your life to create a more positive future for yourself. So with that, I'm just going to start with the presentation. Just give me a second to share the screen. Lovely. So there's a last minute change to the title today. It's called Mind, Body and Soul, the Power of Internal Repetition. Now to start with, I'm just going to give you a basic overview of the brain. And Joe Dispenza talks about there being three core parts to the brain. The first part is the neocortex. This is the conscious mind. You'll see it on the screen as this slightly meshy stuff around the outside here. And this is where actually makes us human. This is how we speculate. This is how we have free will, make decisions. We're creative. This is where we learn. This is where our day-to-day kind of conscious thoughts come from. And to kind of put it into perspective, it's the biggest part of our brain. It's 40% of our brain. And compared to other animals, it's actually what makes us stand out. It's what makes us human. So in a monkey, it's about 15% of the brain is the neocortex. Dogs, it's about 7%. And cats, it's about 3%. So obviously, if you think about how those animals act, how they behave, how they kind of show emotions and attachment, you can kind of see what effect the neocortex has on the mind. Now, the second part of the brain is the limbic brain. The limbic brain, there's very confusing words in here. Nice and simple. We've got the conscious mind, and the limbic brain is the emotional mind. Now, your brain's actually made up of neurons, which is this orange diagram here. Neurons, nice and simple, they're the royal mail of the brain. They deliver messages from one part to another to the rest of your body. They go all the way down your spine and also to your heart as well, which comes into how your heart is actually part of your brain. Now, when your neocortex, when your conscious mind thinks about something, that's going to generate a feeling, an emotion, and that's actually just a release of chemicals from your limbic brain. So what I really want to drill home here is that people feel like thoughts and feelings are these uncontrollable things, but they're actually an actionable thing. A thought is an electric impulse for a neuron, and your emotions, as crazy as they might be, are actually just a release of chemicals from your brain. It's nice and simple. And the third and final part is the reptilian brain, which is your instinct part. This is your instinctual mind, the real core part of a human, and you can actually tell that from how close it is to the spinal cord. So this part of your brain is probably about 250 million years old. It's the most core part of any animal. So just to summarize, we've got the conscious mind, the emotional mind, the instinctual mind. Learning with head, applying by hands, knowing by heart. Knowledge, experience, being. Mind, body, soul. Lovely. So that's just a small overview, I guess, of the brain is. So that's just a small overview of how the brain processes information. Now, as incredible process as that is, there is actually a slight detrimental factor to that, and that's how we actually leverage that system. So there's about 70,000 thoughts that you'd have in a day on average, and about 90% of those were the same as the day before. So essentially, as much as we feel like we're living a new day every single day, 90% of that day is exactly the same as the day before. We're constantly living on this cycle. And it can become problematic because the same thoughts mean the same choices, mean the same behaviors, the same attitudes, the same experiences, and eventually the same emotions. So what this leads to is kind of the loop of thinking and feeling and feeling and thinking. So if you'd like to all just maybe think about what you actually think about on a day-to-day basis. And what I can almost guarantee you is a lot of it is going to be your past experiences. Whether that be yesterday, whether that be a month ago, a year ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, you relive these experiences on a day-to-day basis in your mind. But just going back to what I went through on the brain, if you're thinking about something in your brain, your emotional brain, your limbic brain is actually creating those chemicals in your body. So when you think about the thing that happened to you 5 years ago that caused you such emotional disruption and sadness or joy, your body's actually reliving that moment as you think about it. And this can start to cause health issues. If you're constantly thinking about things that stress you out, maybe in your day-to-day life, things, bills due, managers you don't like, you're constantly living in a moment of stress. You're constantly living in stress, and that's how illnesses start to develop. Actually, they were looking at a study, they reckon 84% of illnesses are actually down to stress, and only about 5% of diseases can actually be put down to genetics. The rest is environment and how you control yourself outside of that. So what I kind of want to get across here, and I just wanted to kind of cover, is that as long as you're thinking in the past, as long as you're thinking about things that have happened to you in the past, your past is always going to become your future, because you're never going to be able to change as a person. So if you really want to make a big change in your life, you've got to get past the memory of yourself. So there is one main way to do this, which is what I'd like to cover today, and it's been massively effective in my life. When your brain learns new things, it actually creates those neurons. That orange diagram I showed you, it creates more of them. So when you're learning stuff, you get more neurons. When you unlearn stuff, like maybe what you learned at school 10 years ago, your brain gets rid of it. It prunes it, gets rid of it. So your brain's constantly rebuilding neurons and getting rid of old ones. So if you really want to create a new future for yourself, you've got to create a new brain. You've got to disrupt the old brain. And to do this is through visualization. Visualization is a massively effective technique. When you close your eyes and visualize the future, your brain cannot differentiate that from the current moment. It actually sees it as reality, and therefore your brain actually starts to hardwire new neurons in your brain that go along with that vision. So if you visualize yourself as a successful, abundant, grateful person, your brain's going to start wiring itself to think that way and start to forget its old self. So you're now no longer living in the past. Now you're living in the future. You're priming your brain to be a map to the future. And there's so much power in this. There's actually a study done by a university in America, and they had a control group that for a whole month visualized doing bicep curls. So they never moved their arms, they just visualized doing bicep curls. And by the end of the month, they could lift 20% higher than what they could at the start of the month without ever lifting a weight. That is the power of your mind. So what I really just want to get across to you today is, if you start visualizing, and if you have a look at that task there and really starting to try and attach emotions to those future version of yourself, your thoughts are not just a thought. It's an actual tangible thing, and it has so much power to transform your life. You just got to learn to leverage it correctly. So hopefully you can make the most of that for your life, because it's made a massive impact on mine so far. Thank you.
Woo, woo! Thank you. Rob.